With only a few hours separating him from his execution, the atmosphere inside the prison was suffocating. It wasn't just another morning. It felt as though the entire building understood what was about to unfold. The clang of iron doors, the sharp echo of boots against concrete, even the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, all of it carried an unusual heaviness that pressed down on both guards and inmates alike. In the middle of it all sat Daniel, motionless on the edge of his narrow cot. His hands rested loosely together, his gaze fixed on the cold, cracked floor. He wasn't the same defiant man who had been led through those gates 7 years ago. Time behind bars had eroded his edges, replacing his sharp arrogance with quiet resignation. The lines on his face spoke of sleepless nights and unspoken regrets. The guards, hardened by routine, had already taken bets on what his final request might be: a last meal dripping in grease, a phone call to a estranged family, maybe even a letter meant to outlive him. But when the warden finally asked, Daniel's voice emerged low and steady, carrying no trace of desperation. "I want to see Max." "My dog." For a moment, the room fell silent. Guards exchanged puzzled looks. It wasn't a request for comfort food, alcohol, or one last indulgence. It wasn't even a request for human contact. He wanted to see a dog, his dog. To Daniel, though, Max wasn't just an animal. He was the last thread connecting him to the man he used to be before everything had spiraled, before the arrest, before the trial, before the cell. Max had been his loyal companion, his shadow, the only being who had loved him without question. In those final hours, Daniel wasn't searching for forgiveness from strangers, nor did he crave sympathy from family who had long since vanished. What he wanted was far simpler, far purer, to look into the same brown eyes that had never judged him, never abandoned him. The warden leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked beneath his chin, weighing the request. In his career, he'd heard bizarre last wishes: a bucket of fried chicken, a guitar no one could tune, a priest who never arrived. But this, bringing a dog into a maximum security facility on the morning of an execution, was something entirely different. In the surveillance room, officers debated fiercely. One insisted it was a breach of protocol. Another argued it was a security risk, that animals had never been allowed inside death row. Then a veteran officer, who rarely spoke, finally broke the silence. "That dog is all he has left. No visitors, no letters, not a single soul has come for him in years. Maybe we should let the man leave this world with some peace." Reluctantly, the warden pulled Daniel's file and skimmed through the notes. Clean record. No fights, no escape attempts. Nothing that marked him as a danger. The file also confirmed the dog's name, Max, a German shepherd who had been with Daniel for 8 long years before being taken into custody when Daniel was arrested. After a tense pause, the warden gave his decision. 10 minutes. Supervised. Yard only. The word spread quickly among the guards. Some shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about the absurdity. Others whispered quietly, almost moved, about the bond between a man and his dog. For Daniel, those 10 minutes would feel like eternity. Somewhere outside the prison walls, Max was being brought to him. Neither man nor dog could have guessed how much those few minutes would alter the course of everything. The prison yard was unnaturally still when the far gate screeched open. Daniel stood by a solitary chair, his wrists loosely cuffed in front of him, his eyes fixed on the entrance as though he were trying to will his companion into existence. Then at last Max appeared. His black and tan coat glistened under the pale, unforgiving light of dawn. His step was slower, heavier, betraying the years, but the moment his eyes found Daniel, the weariness melted away. His ears perked, his tail began to sway hesitantly, then quickened, as though rediscovering a long-lost rhythm. Daniel's breath hitched in his chest. Time had carved gray into Max's muzzle and a stiffness into his stride, but none of that mattered. It was him, his Max. The warden gave a subtle nod, and the leash slackened. That was all it took. The German shepherd bolted forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Daniel dropped to his knees just as Max crashed into his arms. The dog buried his head into Daniel's chest, releasing a sound caught between a whimper and a cry, an expression of joy and sorrow interwoven. In that moment, the walls, the guards, the sentence, all of it dissolved. There was only a man and his dog, together again after years apart. Daniel pressed his face into Max's fur, inhaling deeply. The smell of earth, of leather, of something that felt like home filled his lungs. Memories surged, muddy paw prints on the kitchen floor, late-night walks beneath streetlights, long evenings where Max's steady breathing had kept him sane. But just as Daniel closed his eyes, holding on to that comfort, Max suddenly stiffened in his arms. His tail froze mid-wag, his ears pivoted sharply, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Something wasn't right. A low, primal growl rippled from deep inside Max's chest. Daniel felt the vibration before the sound even reached his ears. He looked down in confusion. Max wasn't gazing at him anymore. The dog's focus had shifted, his body tense, his eyes locked on a figure standing about 10 feet away. Officer Jenkins, tall, rigid, his posture stiff with authority, hands clasped firmly behind his back. Max's lips peeled back just enough to reveal his teeth, a silent warning that carried more weight than any bark could. Several guards shifted uncomfortably. "Get control of your dog," one muttered, taking a cautious step forward. But Daniel gently laid his hand on Max's back, speaking in a calm, almost pleading whisper. "Easy, boy. It's all right." Yet Daniel knew it wasn't. Max had never been the kind of dog to growl without cause. He had always been steady, dependable, his instincts razor sharp. If Max was reacting this way, it meant something was wrong, terribly wrong. Jenkins kept his eyes fixed elsewhere, refusing to meet Daniel's gaze. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his face twitching as though he was holding something back. Daniel's mind churned. He knew his dog better than anyone, and Max's behavior wasn't a mistake. A seed of suspicion began to take root in Daniel's chest. Why Jenkins? Why now? Officer Ramirez, one of the few guards who had always treated Daniel with quiet respect, stepped closer. He kept his voice low, just enough for Daniel to hear. "Your dog's got a good nose," he said. "What's his problem with Jenkins?" Daniel shook his head slightly, choosing his words with care. "Max doesn't growl at strangers for no reason. If he's locked on someone, there's something there." Ramirez frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. Strange. Jenkins was on shift the night you got arrested, but his name was never in the report. The words hit Daniel like a spark to dry kindling. His heart quickened. If Jenkins had been present during his arrest, why wasn't it documented? What was being hidden? Before he could ask anything else, Jenkins reappeared at the far end of the yard. The moment Max saw him, the growl returned, louder this time, sharper, impossible to ignore. Ramirez's eyes narrowed, suspicion darkening his features. "That's not normal," he murmured. From the watchtower above, the warden's voice carried across the yard. "What's going on down there?" But no guard had an answer. The tension hung thick in the air, crackling like a storm waiting to break. Daniel realized this wasn't just a final farewell anymore. Something deeper was unraveling, and Max had just torn the first thread loose. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the truth clawing its way to the surface. Later that afternoon, Daniel was escorted into a small, dimly lit interview room. Against all odds, Max was permitted to remain by his side, the German shepherd stretched out at his feet, every muscle still alert, his eyes fixed on the door like a sentinel. Ramirez leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Jenkins sat opposite Daniel, his posture rigid, eyes as cold as stone. The warden entered last, setting a folder on the table with a deliberate thud. "Officer Jenkins," the warden began, voice measured, "why didn't you disclose that you were present the night Daniel was taken into custody?" Jenkins' jaw flexed. His voice, clipped and tight, came out defensive. "Didn't think it mattered. I was off duty, just passing by." Before anyone could reply, Max leapt to his feet, a sharp bark shattering the air, his teeth bared and his entire body directed squarely at Jenkins. The sound wasn't random, it was accusation. Ramirez stepped forward, his voice calm but steady. "Interesting you say that, Jenkins. Because a new witness came forward. Claims they saw a man matching your description leaving Daniel's house just before the police arrived that night." The warden's eyes hardened, the weight of authority pressing into every word. "Until we get to the bottom of this, the execution is suspended. The case is officially reopened." Daniel's chest rose and fell sharply, a rush of air filling his lungs as though he had been suffocating for years. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was hope. Jenkins shot him a glare that dripped with venom, but Daniel didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, the walls didn't feel impenetrable. There was a crack, and through it, the truth was beginning to shine. And it all started with Max, the dog who refused to forget. The investigation moved with urgency. Evidence long buried was dragged back into the light. Fingerprints once dismissed were retested. They didn't belong to Daniel. They belonged to Jenkins. Witnesses who had been too afraid to speak suddenly found their voices, and every word pointed in the same direction. Jenkins hadn't just been there, he had orchestrated it. He had planted the evidence. He had committed the crime that Daniel had nearly been executed for. Weeks later, Jenkins was arrested, the weight of his betrayal finally catching up to him. Charged with the very murder that had almost stolen Daniel's life, his fall from grace was swift and brutal. The prosecution dropped every charge against Daniel. The case collapsed. The gates that had once seemed like the mouth of hell swung open not to swallow Daniel, but to release him. For the first time in years, he stepped outside without cuffs, without chains, without the shadow of death looming over him. And waiting there, just beyond the fence, was Max, tail wagging furiously, eyes glistening with recognition and relief. Daniel dropped to his knees, tears streaming freely as he buried his face into the familiar fur. His voice cracked, whispering into Max's ear, "We did it, boy. We made it." The dog pressed closer, whining softly, as though he understood every word. Together they stepped forward, past the gates, into the open world. No guards. No bars, just the sound of their footsteps carrying them toward a future neither had dared dream of. The world outside hadn't changed much, the same streets, the same skies, the same endless noise of life carrying on. But Daniel had changed. He was no longer the man defined by a sentence, nor by a crime he hadn't committed. He was the man his dog had believed in all along. A man who had been given a second chance because of loyalty that refused to die. This story reminds us that love doesn't always speak in words, and loyalty doesn't bend to time, walls, or verdicts. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive from the courtroom, but from the unshakable instincts of a dog who remembers the truth when the world forgets. If this story touched your heart, share it, because somewhere out there, another Daniel is waiting for someone or something to believe in him. And sometimes, that belief is the very thing that changes everything.